The wind catches the hide before he reaches the ridge. One edge lifts. Cold air races underneath. The skin twists around his shoulders, and both hands leave his spear to pull it closed. That is the problem with carrying an animal's skin. The animal wore it perfectly. On a human body, it slips, opens, and lets the weather inside. Why did humans begin wearing clothes? And how did a loose piece of skin become technology strong enough to change where our species could live? The first answer is probably not shame. Clothing began as something more urgent, a shelter that could move with the body. But solving the motive opens a harder mystery. Almost none of the first clothing survived. Hide, fibre, and cord usually rot away. So how can we know when humans started wearing it? The strangest witness is still alive, and it bites. Head lice live among hair. Clothing lice spend much of their lives in fabric, laying eggs in folds and seams. That second home could not exist until humans wore clothing regularly enough for a new population of lice to adapt to it. Researchers compared their DNA and used a genetic clock to estimate when clothing lice separated from head louse ancestors. One influential model placed that split at least 83,000 years ago, and possibly as early as 170,000 years ago. That is not the birthday of clothing. Molecular clocks produce ranges, not eyewitness dates. Other human species may also have used hides without leaving descendants we can sample, and occasional wraps could have existed long before lice found a permanent home in them. But the clue tells us something important. Regular clothing used by modern humans may be far older than the oldest surviving shirt, and far older than the first-eyed needle. The clothes disappeared. Their parasites kept the record. Yet putting a hide over your shoulders is the easy part. Keeping it useful is where the real invention begins. Fresh skin is not a ready-made coat. It carries fat and tissue. Left untreated, it can decay. As it dries, it can shrink and stiffen. Cut it carelessly, and the holes can become tears that let wind and water through. So the work begins after the hunt. The skin must be removed, its inner surface must be cleaned. Repeated scraping, stretching, and working can make it lighter and more flexible. Different groups, materials, and climates would have produced different methods, most of which left no direct trace. The tools survive better than the clothing. Microscopic wear and residues on some ancient stone tools show contact with hide. But a hide scraper is not automatic proof of a coat. Skins could become bedding, shelter, containers, or coverings. The important point is that early humans learned to change the material. They were no longer merely stealing an animal's skin. They were engineering its properties. Even then, a loose wrap had a weakness. Wind could open it. Walking could pull it sideways. Working with both hands meant there was no hand left to hold it closed. The next breakthrough was not a new material. It was a hole. A pointed stone or bone awl could pierce the hide. A strip of skin, plant cord, or sinew could pass through the opening. One edge could now be tied to another. That simple change let clothing follow the body. Arms could move while the chest remained covered. A wrap could stay closed while someone carried wood, climbed rock, or held a child. Several pieces could be joined. Openings could be narrowed around the neck, wrists, or legs. This mattered because a loose skin and a fitted garment do not protect in the same way. Clothing works partly by trapping a layer of air near the body. Loose coverings offer some insulation, but wind repeatedly replaces that warmed air. Closer fitting layers reduce those gaps. Additional layers trap more air and provide better protection. Clothing did not single-handedly carry humans into every cold environment. Fire, shelter, food, social cooperation, and movement all mattered, but portable insulation changed the calculation. Warmth no longer had to remain at the fire. Some of it could travel with the person. There was still another problem. A garment that blocks wind can fail in rain. So how carefully did early humans protect the hide itself? At a Neanderthal site in France, researchers studied an unmodified fragment of reindeer bone with a heavily smoothed edge. Their analysis suggested that it had been pushed between skin and flesh while an animal was being flayed. Bone could separate the tissues without the sharp edge of stone accidentally slicing through the hide. Why would that matter? Because an unwanted cut could damage a large, relatively impermeable skin. The researchers suggest that preserving intact hides would have been useful for water-resistant leather objects, potentially including clothing or bags. The tool does not prove that a particular coat was made. The garment is gone. But it reveals planning at the exact place where the material could be ruined. Before anyone pierced deliberate holes for fastening, they may have worked hard to prevent every accidental one. Now the contradiction becomes clear. Clothing makers needed holes, but only in the right places. They needed seams, but not leaks. They needed flexibility without destroying strength. Awls could already solve much of this. So if fitted clothing existed before eyed needles, why invent the needle at all? The eyed needle did not invent clothing. Bone awls and stone borers could make a row of holes. Cord or sinew could then be pushed through by hand. In southern Africa, bone awls appear tens of thousands of years before the familiar eyed needles of the later Ice Age. An eyed needle combined two actions. Its point opened a path, while its eye pulled thread behind it. That made repeated, finer sewing easier. Seams could become closer and more controlled. Garments could fit more precisely. Multiple layers, smaller pieces, and repairs became less cumbersome. Eyed needles appear in the archaeological record around 40,000 years ago, long after the clothing louse estimate suggests regular clothing had begun. That timing changes the question. The needle may not mark the beginning of clothing. It may mark a moment when clothing became more complex, tailored layers, finer seams, and perhaps garments decorated with beads or other ornaments. The body was no longer the only surface humans could decorate. Clothing itself could carry identity, but every new environment humans created also invited something else to move in. Clothing solved exposure and created a new habitat. Folds, fibers, and seams gave clothing lice a place to live, feed, and lay eggs. The same parasite that helps date regular clothing also reveals one of its costs, and lice were only the beginning. Hides took time to remove, clean, soften, pierce, fasten, and repair. A damaged garment could represent days of labor. It had to be carried when the weather was warm and protected from moisture, fire, and scavengers. Clothing also changed dependence inside the group. One person might hunt, another might scrape. Someone with practiced hands could place holes without tearing the edge. Knowledge about fit, fiber, and repair had to survive from one season to the next. There was probably no single inventor standing beside a finished coat. Clothing accumulated, one better tie, one softer hide, one closer seam, one lesson about where wind entered. And somewhere along that long process, protection became communication. Did humans begin covering themselves because they felt ashamed? The honest answer is that archaeology cannot recover the first feeling of modesty. What it can show is a strong, practical sequence. Climate created demand for portable insulation. Hide working made skins more useful. Piercing tools enabled fit. Fine sewing enabled greater complexity. Later garments could also show belonging, age, skill, or status. Ornaments that once hung directly on the body could be sewn onto clothing. A useful covering became a visible social surface. So, protection or identity is the wrong choice. Clothing could become both. The first motive was probably not one universal decision shared by every human group. Cold, wind, rain, insects, sun, thorns, and social expectations varied across time and place. But the oldest evidence points us away from a sudden invention of modesty and toward a gradual survival technology. Now return to the ridge. The wind rises again, but this time the hide does not lift. Its inner surface has been worked until it bends. Deliberate holes sit away from the weakened edge. A tie keeps the chest closed while both hands remain on the spear. A second layer protects the opening at the neck. This person is not invulnerable. The garment can still become wet, tear, or fail. The cold has not disappeared, but the body is carrying a small, controlled climate. That was the deeper breakthrough. Humans did not grow their fur back. They learned to borrow it, reshape it, and take it wherever they went. If you want to see how humans survived ordinary life before it became comfortable, like this video and subscribe to Before Comfort.